In this video, what I want to do is go over some of the basic commands in RStudio that you can use to do calculations and do statistics. I'm assuming here that you already have access to RStudio. That if you don't, watch the video on how to sign up for cloud access for free to RStudio. But once you're in, I want to just get started with some of the most basic commands. Because the reality is that you can do any calculation you want in RStudio. And in fact, I recommend doing that. There's not really a good reason to be using any other calculator in this course. And even though you can do it, and there's nothing wrong with that, I think you'll benefit if you just immerse yourself in RStudio and say, all I'm going to do is compute stuff in RStudio. Because there are things that you have to compute in RStudio. And by forcing yourself from the start just to only do calculations in here, later on, when you need to use RStudio, you'll be so much more familiar with it and it'll really pay off. All right, so I'm going to zoom in on this bottom left corner to type in a few basic commands, and I'm going to do some stuff that we know the answer to. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some numbers. So if I type, for instance, 34 plus 55, it tells me that that's 89. So I can do addition in RStudio. I can also do multiplication, 4 times 7. So there I use an asterisk for times. Tells me that's 28. I can do subtraction, right? 56 minus 22 is 34. And I can do division, and division will be a forward slash. So it'll be something like 32 divided by 4. Tells me that that's 8. What other commands can we do that we'll need? Well, we'll need exponentiation. So let's say I want to raise something to the third power. I would type, if I want to raise 6 to the third power, I would type the caret symbol and then a 3. And this tells me that 6 cubed is 216. And if I want to take a square root, I type SQRT. So square root of 64 is 8. And I need to put that 64 in parentheses. So these are the basic commands that we'll need in this course. And one thing we'll encounter further is that we want to be able to type complicated expressions in and have RStudio evaluate it. So for instance, maybe I want to add 2 numbers and then divide by something. I want to do 32 plus 47, and then I want to divide by 5. And so it did that for me. It said it's 15.8. And notice, because I wanted it to add the 32 and the 47 before dividing by 5, I had to put those in parentheses. Order of operations is essential when you're typing into a program like RStudio, because it can't tell what you want it to do. That is, it will only do what you literally tell it to do. And if you do something, for instance, like leave off the parentheses, it'll give you a different answer, because based on order of operations, it thinks that you want it to divide the 47 by 5 first and then add the 32. And there's a few other little details like this that you have to be careful of. Like for instance, if I want to do 3 times 4 plus 7, this looks fine visually, because this is how we would write it a lot, but it's not going to work in the software. And the reason is that it doesn't know that when you put the 3 next to the parentheses, you're telling it to multiply. And so if I really want this to multiply, I have to do 3 times 4 plus 7. And it tells me that that's 33. So we can do some really basic arithmetic in RStudio. That's not the reason we're using this, though, although we will very frequently do basic arithmetic in RStudio. The reason we're using this is to do statistics. And so for that, I want to go back to this data set from section 1.2. This times with the current instrument. And what I want to do is I want to import this data set into RStudio so that I can work with it. So I'm going to flip back here to this code, and I'm going to type in the command to enter all these numbers into RStudio. So I need to name this data set, and I'm going to call it current, because that is something that reminds me of what it represents. It represents the times with the current instrument. And the way I enter a data set in RStudio, I first have to type a lowercase c. RStudio is case sensitive, and then an open parentheses. And then inside those parentheses, I have to type in all of the times. So they're 4.15, 4.05, 3.92, 3.94, 3.88. And you may realize that this seems a bit tedious, and you might say, well, is this really what we have to do? We have to enter these one at a time. And the answer is most often not. In this case, I'm just trying to really show that we can do this very step-by-step and type this out. But oftentimes, if I give you a data set, I'll just give it to you as a comma-separated list. So you can just copy and paste into RStudio. And there are other more advanced ways to import data sets. If we zoom out, you can see that there's this import data set thing in the top right under environment that would allow us to import data from an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. So there are more advanced ways to get data into RStudio. For now, since we're working with a small data set, I just typed it in one value at a time. So I typed all this in and I clicked enter. And if we zoom back out, what you'll see is that up in the top right here, we now have this data set represented up there. So in the top right in this environment area, it's telling you all of the things that you've entered into RStudio. All right, so one thing I can do with this is I can just confirm that it is what I want it to be. If I type current, it will print out all of the numbers that are supposed to be in the data set. And just to point something out, if I type a lowercase current, which it's trying to autocomplete it to something else, it'll tell me it can't find that object. Again, RStudio is case sensitive. So if I define something with a capital letter, I need to continue representing it with a capital letter. All right, so I can really quickly do some statistics on this data set. If I type summary of current, it's going to give me, well, it's giving me the 5-number summary plus also the mean, right? So it gives me the min, the first quartile, the median, the third quartile, and the max. That's the 5-number summary, and it also tells me the mean. So that's one nice thing I can do. Notice this mean is rounded to 2 decimal places, and maybe for whatever reason I need more than 2 decimal places, so I can also just get the mean directly. So if I type mean of current, now in this case, this was a bad example, so I think it actually rounds to 2 decimal places exactly, but that is 4.02 is not rounded at all. That's actually the mean of the data set. But if it had more decimal places, it would display those. I can also find the standard deviation. If I type SD, and here's an example where it does tell me more decimal places, right? Because I may need that. Here it gave me the standard deviation to 7 decimal places. What else can I do with this? So these were some summary statistics, right? We have our measures of spread, our measures of center, but we also like to create graphs. And so if I want to create a histogram of this data set, I type hist of current, and I'll zoom back to the full RStudio to see what happens when I click enter. So when I click enter, it's going to put a histogram of this data set into the bottom right area, which is where all the plots will go. I can also create a box plot, right? So if I type box plot of current and click enter, I'll get a box plot there, which is pretty nice. And when you get these images, depending on what your computer does and how it's working, you could, if you wanted to use this in a document or in a presentation, you could screenshot it. You can also often just drag and drop the image. That is, you can't really see on this video, but if you just click on the image and drag it, you can usually drag it into a Google document or a Word document. There's also an export button, so you could save this image as a PDF or save it as an image. So you can really quickly create graphs. And in the first mini project, you'll see that we can do other stuff as well. So for instance, in this histogram here, the histogram of the current data set, maybe I don't like this title, right? If I'm doing a presentation, I don't want it to say histogram of current. And so maybe I want it to say something like times with the current instrument. I can change the title. So in the mini project, the first mini project, there will be a few instances where we kind of show you how you can go and change some of the default settings for the histogram, so you can get a presentation quality thing. For now, that's basically all I wanted to mention, just that all of the stuff we've done so far in this course, we can do in RStudio, and we can do it really quickly, especially once we get familiar with it. And if it seems like there's a lot of stuff to memorize here or stuff to remember, I'd point out two things. One, this console area in RStudio, as long as you don't click on the broom in the top right, which you can do, that will clear everything you've typed. Everything you've typed stays there. So if you just let your kind of the script you've done run, you can scroll back and forth. And let's say you're working on a homework assignment and you don't remember how to get the 5-number summary, you can scroll back up and say, oh, right, that command was summary. The other thing is that one of the appendixes in the workbook is a list of a bunch of useful RStudio commands. So that's another place you can go to remind yourself of what these commands are. I think a lot of them you'll just become familiar with really quickly on your own. Other ones that are a bit trickier, that is, that have more details that you need to enter each time, you may have to go back every time, but in the end, using RStudio will save you so much time over using a graphing calculator or doing stuff by hand. And as the course moves on, I'll have more and more videos where I talk about different things we can do in RStudio, but hopefully this video gave you what you need initially to get started using RStudio to do statistics.